Mafia boss falls hard for the sweet, shy waitress. And his dark heart softens. Snow fell in soft flakes over River North as Celeste stepped out of Giordano's, rolling her coat tighter around her small frame. Her dark ponytail peeked from beneath the hood, eyes wide and filled with sudden terror. Two men seized her, their grip harsh and unrelenting, dragging her toward a waiting black van. Her scream pierced the chill air, sharp and desperate. Across town, Vin sat in his black Mercedes, phone pressed to his ear. His driver navigated the slick streets with precision, but Vin hardly noticed. Broad shoulders tense, sharp features rigid, his ice blue eyes burned with rage he could not control. The man who had never shown fear, never lost composure, felt something break inside him. He had trained his entire life to suppress any hint of humanity. Yet this gentle waitress, petite, shy, ordinary, had made him feel it all at once. Protection, anger, desire, and something he had long buried. The most dangerous man in Chicago was about to remind the city why you never touch what belongs to him. How did a ruthless mafia boss come to care so deeply for a shy, innocent waitress? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe. Tomorrow, a new story you won't want to miss will drop. Let's begin. It was an October afternoon in River North, the streets lined with amber leaves and the faint scent of roasting chestnuts from nearby stalls. Giordano's felt almost empty, the quiet hum of conversation mingling with the occasional clatter of dishes. The restaurant's warm lights reflected off the polished wooden tables, casting a gentle glow over the brick walls and framed black and white photographs of Chicago's past. Celeste moved from table to table, rolling silverware with methodical precision. Her mind wandered to the essay she needed to finish for her psychology course, her thoughts briefly brushing against the small goals she had set for herself. Finish her associate degree, save enough for a bachelor's, find a quiet place to study without interruption. She liked this rhythm, the predictability, the way small tasks offered a sense of order in a life that often felt far from orderly. Her apartment in Logan Square was modest but hers alone, filled with second-hand books, potted plants, and the small comforts she could afford. She worked hard to maintain her independence, setting aside money from tips and wages for her education, keeping herself free from reliance on anyone else. Her past had taught her caution. Her father's death years ago under circumstances that never fully made sense, the careful vigilance of her older brothers, the quiet resolve to never let tragedy define her path. The door opened, and the rush of cold October air brought a sudden shift in the room. Celeste glanced up and saw him, Vin. He entered with two men, each exuding the kind of presence that commanded attention without a word. The warmth of the restaurant seemed to pull back, and the soft murmur of conversation dipped into silence. The faint clatter of cutlery seemed louder somehow, sharper, as though the room itself had taken notice of his arrival. Celeste felt a chill run down her spine. Her heart tapped unevenly against her ribs, an echo of instincts honed through years of loss and careful observation. She had seen men who demanded attention before, men whose presence made others step aside, but there was something about him that reached deeper. It was as if he carried both distance and force in equal measure, and though she couldn't name it, she recognized danger immediately. Suppressing the urge to step back, she approached the table, clipboard in hand, voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Good afternoon. Can I start you gentlemen with something to drink?" Her eyes rested somewhere around the collar of his suit rather than meeting his gaze directly. Politeness was a shield, and she relied on it instinctively. Vin's attention was split, phone in hand, scrolling through messages with mechanical focus, his posture composed, unshaken by the attention around him. Then he looked up, and in that moment, something unquantifiable shifted. He observed her small frame, the careful precision in the way she held her pad, the quiet steadiness behind her brown eyes. It wasn't beauty that caught him, though she had it. It wasn't charm or flirtation. It was something purer, something absent from a world he knew to be harsh and unyielding. He felt the faintest pull, an awareness that startled him with its intensity. He had lived years thinking emotional detachment was a shield, that no one could touch the core of him, that human warmth was a weakness. Yet here, before him, stood a woman whose presence contradicted every assumption he had ever made. "Celeste," he said, the name falling from his lips with a weight he did not intend. It was not a greeting, not a question, not a statement. It was acknowledgement, recognition, a subtle admission that he had registered something he could not articulate. The way he said it, slow, deliberate, sent a ripple through the air between them. Her eyes flicked up briefly, finally meeting his, and in that instant, the electric tension was undeniable. Time did not slow, it did not stretch. It simply registered, recorded, and embedded itself into the rhythm of their first contact. For Vin, the need to know everything about her emerged instantly. Not from casual curiosity, not from casual interest, but from a deeper, instinctive drive to protect, to observe, to understand. Within hours, his security team would start quietly learning about her life, where she lived, her routines, her family, her vulnerabilities. Each detail compounded his fascination, each revelation fanning the embers of a protective obsession he had never anticipated. Celeste continued her routine, unaware of the silent calculations unfolding in the sharp blue eyes across the room. She noticed the subtle weight of his presence as he settled into his seat, the quiet observation that lingered even as she refilled water glasses and adjusted napkins. Something about him was intense, concentrated, and yet restrained, danger held in check by control honed over decades. His men, trained to notice shifts in their boss, registered the change too. Their eyes met briefly over folded arms, a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted in the man who rarely shifted at all. They did not comment, they never did. They only watched, knowing when to intervene and when to remain still. By the time Vin left that afternoon, the faintest trace of curiosity, of desire, of something human, had begun to mark him. A ruthless, calculated man who had never allowed tenderness to touch him had felt the stirrings of it for the first time. And though neither of them understood the full implications, the encounter planted a seed that would grow, slowly and irrevocably, in the months to come. Weeks passed. October bled into November, and the air grew crisper, the streets of River North lined with damp leaves and the faint tang of early winter in the wind. Vin had made himself a regular at Giordano's, always requesting the same section, always subtly ensuring he sat where Celeste would serve him. His presence was impossible to ignore. A tall man in a tailored black suit, two discreet bodyguards nearby, eyes that seemed to see everything in the room. Celeste's hands trembled slightly when she brought him his coffee, trying to steady the cup as he offered tips that made her blush and stammer. The amounts were generous beyond reason, enough to make her colleagues exchange glances and whisper quietly among themselves. She placed the tips in the register, conflicted. She needed the money, and yet each extra bill reminded her of the unspoken attention that accompanied it. Within hours of their first meeting, Vin had discreetly gathered details of her life. Her father's death, long treated as an accident, her modest studio in Logan Square, her volunteer work with children who had experienced hardship, the routes she took walking home after late shifts. The knowledge struck him sharply. She was unprotected in a city that demanded constant vigilance. Rage flared in his chest, a protective instinct he did not understand, a raw urgency to shield her from any harm. He assigned a shadow, one of his trusted men, to follow her discreetly. The guard ensured she reached home safely, reporting back with precision. It was invisible protection, yet Vin slept only fitfully, thinking of the small figure navigating darkened streets, unaware of the eyes that followed. One evening, a drunk man tried to intimidate Celeste outside the restaurant, leaning too close, words slurred. She froze, panic rising in her chest, but before he could act, Vin's shadow stepped in. The altercation ended with the man left unconscious in an alley. Celeste had no idea the intervention was connected to him, yet the incident left her shaken, reinforcing the vague sense that she was being watched, not for judgment but for her safety. Vin adjusted his schedule around her shifts, rearranging meetings, delaying calls, orchestrating his day so he could pass through the restaurant without causing a stir. He observed her quietly, the way she greeted regulars, the care with which she served families, the rare smiles she allowed herself when a child waved. Each gesture reinforced his fascination, the subtle differences between her warmth and the cold efficiency of the world he had always known. Celeste was aware of the attention, though she struggled to define it. He was undeniably powerful, the suits, the drivers, the deference from others. She recognized the danger he carried like an invisible weight. And yet, when their eyes met, she glimpsed another layer, a loneliness, a quiet vulnerability that seemed confined to the moments he spent with her. His gaze softened only in her presence, and she found herself anticipating it with a mix of fear and something she did not yet name. Her co-workers whispered about the handsome, silent man who seemed to follow her every day, though none knew the truth of who he was or why. Celeste pretended not to hear, but she felt the tension, the pull, the subtle acknowledgement that her presence mattered in ways she did not fully understand. At home, she thought of him in passing moments, shaking her head at the unbidden smile his presence caused. She tried to push the attraction aside, labeling it inappropriate, dangerous, a distraction from her studies and responsibilities. And yet, when the door opened at Giordano's and he stepped inside, the routine of her day shifted. The quiet rhythm of silverware, plates, and orders fractured around him. Her pulse accelerated, her thoughts sharpened, and a small part of her acknowledged that she looked forward to seeing him more than she wanted to admit. Vin's fascination deepened. Each revelation about her life, her independence, her modesty, her commitment to helping others, added layers to his understanding. He saw the contrast between her world and his own, one built on protection through fear, one lived with quiet courage and integrity. He found himself re-evaluating small decisions, pondering the implications of violence, calculating risks not for territory or profit, but for her safety. The weeks progressed, the city shifting from amber to gray as the first hints of winter settled over rooftops and sidewalks. The leaves turned brittle, the wind sharper, and the streets more treacherous. Vin felt an increasing need to be near her, to ensure she was unharmed, to occupy space in her life without drawing attention to himself. It was a tension between distance and presence, a quiet negotiation of proximity, and he measured every step carefully. Celeste's awareness of the change in him grew. There were moments when his eyes lingered longer than necessary, when the slight tilt of his head seemed more than observation, when his voice carried a subtle care that extended beyond routine politeness. She found herself wondering why someone like him, someone so clearly entrenched in power and danger, would devote time, attention, and resources to her. The approach of winter cemented the routine, his visits, his quiet vigilance, the shadow of protection that followed her. The rhythm of daily life became punctuated by the knowledge of his presence, and the delicate tension between fear and attraction deepened. Neither spoke of it directly, yet the undercurrent was undeniable. By late November, the pattern was established. Celeste navigated her shifts with practiced politeness, yet she could not ignore the change he brought to her world. Vin operated with a precision she could not fully comprehend, but she felt its effects daily. He was dangerous, yes, but in ways she did not yet understand, he was also protective. The duality intrigued her, confused her, and forced her to confront feelings she had long avoided, anticipation, curiosity, and a growing sense that her life was entwining with someone she could not easily categorize. Winter's chill descended fully, and Vin's presence in her life became both routine and impossible to ignore. He was near without interference, observing without intrusion, protecting without acknowledgement. And Celeste, despite her best efforts to maintain detachment, felt the pull of his gaze, the weight of his attention, and the strange comfort of being seen by someone who existed in a world so different from her own. The December air sliced through the streets of Chicago, cold enough to make breath visible, light snow settling on Michigan Avenue and flickering in the glow of the Christmas lights. Celeste's shift ended at 11, and exhaustion weighed on her bones like a leaden coat. She wrapped her thin jacket tighter, tugging at her scarf, and stepped into the night. The streets were nearly empty, save for a few late taxis and the hum of distant traffic. A black Mercedes idled near the curb. Vin sat inside, driver in place, hands folded in his lap. The coincidence of seeing him here was anything but accidental. Celeste hesitated, the urge to keep walking wrestling with the strange pull she felt. His head tilted slightly, and the offer came quietly, controlled, "Let me drive you home." Her instincts screamed to refuse. The city was unpredictable, strangers were dangerous, and he was him. Yet, the exhaustion, the cold, the faint relief of presence drew her toward the door. She slid into the passenger seat. Leather pressed against her back, warmth spreading slowly, insulated from the world outside. The partition to the driver was a subtle reminder of the distance, yet the enclosed space brought an intimacy that neither dared acknowledge. They drove through the city with deliberate silence. The Chicago River shimmered under streetlights, the Kennedy Expressway stretched ahead, a stream of headlights trailing behind. Vin's eyes stayed on her, not pressing, merely observing. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers entwined, nails biting lightly, the nervous habits she tried to hide. "You're afraid of me," he said softly, voice even but unyielding. "Yes," she admitted. "But you don't run." "No," she whispered. "Why not?" Her gaze lifted, meeting his for the first time without looking away. The vulnerability in her eyes, the honesty in her voice, shattered something he had guarded for decades. Her next words cut deeper than any physical wound, "Because I think you're more afraid than I am." Vin's chest tightened, a pressure he could not ignore. His carefully constructed armor cracked, the ice inside him splintering. Pain mixed with a strange relief, the shock of being seen, understood in a way no one ever had. This gentle girl had glimpsed a truth he had hidden for 26 years. The fear behind his control, the fragile human beneath the monster he presented. The rest of the drive passed in a quiet tension. Celeste turned her attention to the city outside, noticing small details. The lights reflecting off the snow, a late-night diner, the rhythm of streets she knew by heart. Vin watched her closely, memorizing every careful movement, every flicker of expression, feeling the pull of a connection that defied explanation. When they reached her modest apartment building, the car slowed, engine idling. Neither moved immediately. Celeste's coat brushed the seat as she adjusted, fingers lingering on the door handle. Vin's gaze stayed fixed on her, waiting, patient, though he felt the ache of restraint. The world outside seemed distant, the streetlights a halo over the falling snow. Finally, Celeste spoke softly, acknowledging the moment without breaking it. "Thank you for tonight." Vin inclined his head, words unnecessary. The understanding passed between them was enough. Something fundamental had shifted. He had glimpsed a light he had long denied could exist in his life. She had seen the human beneath the armor, and in that recognition, both were altered. The car remained for a moment longer, both of them suspended between distance and proximity, between the roles they played and the truths that had surfaced. The snow continued to fall, layering the streets in quiet white, as if the city itself had paused to witness the shift. Celeste finally stepped out, the door closing softly behind her. Vin started the car again, not driving away immediately, letting the moment linger, imprinting the scene into memory. Her careful movements, the way she held herself despite fear, the quiet bravery in her gaze. This night marked a turning point. The ice that had insulated Vin's heart was no longer solid. Cracks had formed, spreading warmth into spaces that had long been frozen. For Celeste, the encounter was a revelation, a recognition that the man she feared could also hold a capacity for care she had not imagined. By the time he drove away, the city was quiet again, snow reflecting the faint glow of streetlights. Both carried the knowledge that the dynamic between them had changed irreversibly. Fear, caution, and desire were now intertwined, shaping decisions, influencing movements, and setting the stage for a winter that would test the boundaries of both their lives. The quiet of the night settled over Logan Square as she entered her building. Celeste leaned against the door for a brief moment, taking a deep breath, aware of the tension in her chest that was neither entirely fear nor entirely comfort. She realized she had glimpsed the man beneath the legend, the human beneath the power. And Vin, behind the wheel, allowed himself a slow exhale, feeling the first stirrings of something he had long thought impossible. A willingness to let someone see him, to let someone matter beyond influence and control. Winter tightened its grip on Chicago, turning the streets slick with ice and coating rooftops in frost. Days grew shorter, nights stretching long and cold, but Vin moved through them with a subtle shift noticeable only to those who observed closely. His associates remarked on his restraint in meetings, the measured calm in his decisions, yet none spoke aloud. The streets still respected him, but something had changed in the man who once relied on fear to command obedience. A territorial dispute in Bridgeport tested the adjustment. Two of Vin's men confronted a rival crew over encroaching operations. His old response would have been immediate and violent, but instead, Vin arrived with quiet authority. He listened, asked questions, and negotiated a compromise that satisfied both sides. Observers were startled. His presence was still formidable, but the outcome avoided bloodshed. Inside, Vin noted the satisfaction in handling conflict without raising a hand, the weight in his chest lighter than it had been in years. One evening, Vin visited the widow of a man who had died in his service. He arranged a trust fund to support her, the papers executed discreetly. Another night, an anonymous donation appeared at the Pilsen Community Center where Celeste volunteered, funding winter programs for children. He drove past her sometimes, watching her interact with the kids, her laughter brightening the gray snow, her patience shaping moments of calm and joy. Celeste never demanded change. She didn't lecture him or preach morality. Her influence was quiet, persistent. Vin noticed her kindness at work, handling difficult customers with gentle firmness, diffusing tension without raising her voice. He saw her compassion and understood it was deliberate, a strength she chose to wield. In those moments, he began seeing his world differently, not as a series of transactions and threats, but as a network of lives shaped by choice and care. Brief scenes of them together punctuated his days. Coffee after her shifts, soft conversations about her education and dreams, her ambitions measured yet confident. Vin felt a growing conflict inside him, a desire to give her everything, to shield her completely, but also an awareness that he could not impose control without violating the trust that had begun to form. He was learning that respect and love required patience and humility. His rivals, however, sensed the change. Whispers ran through the organization. "Vin's softening," they murmured. His lieutenant, his closest confidant, confronted him privately. "You can't afford weakness, boss. People will test you." Vin's reply was calm, measured, firm. "I'm not weak. I'm evolving. There's strength in restraint. There's power in seeing the cost of my actions." The city around them moved on, unaware of the subtle changes within its shadows. The winter deepened, and with it came challenges neither Vin nor Celeste could foresee. The world he sought to navigate with careful control was shifting in ways beyond his calculation. Yet, for the first time, he approached danger differently. Not purely through force, but through presence, strategy, and the lessons learned from the quiet girl who had opened a space inside his heart. Evenings were now a mix of vigilance and reflection. He often drove past Giordano's after her shift, catching glimpses of her wrapping up work, gathering coats, helping customers leave with a smile. He felt a protective pull stronger than before, tempered by understanding that she could navigate life with courage. He observed, silently encouraging, without imposing himself. Vin noticed small internal transformations in himself. The temper he had relied on to dominate was now modulated. The instinct to strike first was replaced by thoughtfulness. The drive to control had softened into a desire to guide. Celeste's presence was the catalyst, but the change was his own, a conscious choice, difficult and deliberate, not imposed by circumstance. As January progressed, snow continued to fall, layering the streets in white, covering Chicago in quiet. Vin and Celeste shared brief, ordinary moments. Walking side by side for a block, sharing hot drinks, discussing books and lectures, laughing over small misunderstandings. These moments felt extraordinary to him, a contrast to the intensity and danger that defined most of his life. Yet beneath the calm, an approaching threat loomed. Vin could sense it, not fully defined, not immediate, but a tension in the city that would demand his attention. The lessons learned from Celeste, the glimpses of humanity and restraint, would be tested. Both of them, he realized, were moving forward on fragile ground. His empire, his life, and the bond forming between them all dependent on careful choices. And still, for the first time in decades, he was willing to try. The monster that had once ruled through fear now learned patience, empathy, and the value of gentle influence. The winter of Chicago pressed in, cold and unforgiving, yet within it was warmth, small, fragile, but real. A monster was learning humanity, and it was because of the quiet, steady heart of a waitress who had never known power but understood strength. February snow fell steadily over Chicago, coating the streets in a thin, cold layer that reflected the dim glow of streetlights. Celeste stepped out of Giordano's, her shift finally over, the sound of her boots muffled on the wet pavement. She wrapped her thin coat tighter, shoulders hunched against the wind, unaware of the footsteps closing in behind her. The first grab came without warning. Strong hands yanked her backward. Her scream cut sharply through the winter air, bouncing off the brick buildings of River North. Her petite frame twisted and thrashed, nails clawed at jackets and faces, but strength alone could not fend off professional efficiency. Two men moved with precision, each motion calculated. A black van idled a few feet away, engine humming, exhaust curling in the icy air. Celeste's eyes widened in terror. Her breath came in short gasps as she realized the danger she faced. The men were methodical, practiced. The van door swung open, promising confinement and unknown threats. Across town, Vin's phone buzzed insistently. He had been in a meeting, far from the city's north side, when the call came. His driver accelerated through streets slick with snow, weaving past traffic. Vin's tailored black suit seemed incongruous with the sudden tension gripping him. His normally composed features were tight, blue eyes burning with a rare, raw intensity. Vin's shadow guards appeared as if drawn by instinct. From alleys and corners, they converged on the scene with quiet efficiency. Suppressors muffled gunshots that rang with finality. In moments, the two attackers lay neutralized before Celeste could even comprehend the full threat. The black van stood abandoned, its occupants gone, leaving only the echo of danger in the cold air. Celeste's knees buckled. She wrapped her arms around herself, coat clutched tight as shock settled in. Shaking, she pressed against the brick wall, the adrenaline ebbing slowly, leaving only a trembling awareness of vulnerability. Her hands, still red from the cold, quivered as she fumbled for her phone. The call went through to Vin, and relief washed over her when his voice, calm but taut, answered. Vin arrived minutes later, the Mercedes sliding smoothly to a stop. His presence was different now, disheveled hair, coat left open, eyes reflecting fear she had never seen before. He moved toward her with caution, hands reaching for her face and arms, checking for injury with gentle precision. "Are you hurt?" His tone carried urgency and an unfamiliar vulnerability. Tears spilled freely from Celeste's eyes. The delayed reaction of pure fear mixed with the relief of survival overcame her. Vin held her steady, his strong hands warm against her icy skin. Around them, his men worked swiftly, removing the bodies of the attackers and clearing the street without a sound, leaving only the quiet snow as witness. Vin's mind raced. Identification came quickly. A rival family had seized an opportunity, interpreting the growing softness in his behavior as weakness. White-hot rage ignited inside him, a familiar and consuming fire. The old Vin, the man who ruled through fear, intimidation, and control, roared to life, ready to exact a response that would leave no doubt about his reach. As he held Celeste, her whispered words pierced the storm of his fury. "Please don't. Please don't become that again. Not for me." The plea anchored him. Her innocence, her trust, her belief in the possibility of better choices reminded him of what he had been learning over the past months. The monster within him had begun to soften, not fully, but enough for her voice to reach him. Vin forced himself to release the immediate desire for blood, choosing strategy over instinct. His men continued to secure the area, removing evidence and ensuring Celeste's safety before she was even aware of the precision behind it all. The city streets, coated in snow, felt momentarily quiet, holding only the tension of the near catastrophe. Celeste, wrapped in her coat, allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her eyes, still glistening with tears, met Vin's. She saw the storm beneath his calm surface, the control and authority honed over decades, tempered now by an unmistakable vulnerability. That she had the power to evoke both fearlessness and restraint in him struck her with a mix of awe and caution. Vin's mind worked rapidly, calculating not just retaliation for the attackers but considering the network behind them. The rival family, their associates, everyone connected, each decision carried weight. A total war strategy formed in his mind, but her words continued to resonate, forcing him to consider alternatives. He would not ignore offense, yet he would temper it with the understanding that his humanity, fragile and newly reclaimed, could not be sacrificed. For Celeste, the encounter had been both terror and revelation. She had glimpsed the reality of Vin's world in a concentrated, brutal moment. The man who had seemed untouchable, untamed, revealed a capacity for fear and care, exposing dimensions she could not have predicted. The snow fell heavier now, mixing with tears and the chill of the city night. Vin stood close, silent for a heartbeat, considering the implications of the attack. Her voice, fragile yet insistent, stayed in his ears, a reminder of the choice he had made for months to soften his approach. Not for me. Though the threat had been neutralized, both of them knew the risk had not passed entirely. The city held more eyes, more calculations, more potential for violence. Yet, in that fleeting moment, the lesson was clear. Protection meant more than strength. It required restraint, presence, and an awareness of consequences beyond immediate power. And as Vin led Celeste back toward the safety of his car, snow melting under tires and boots, both understood a simple truth. Survival was not enough. Trust and restraint, the capacity to resist old instincts, and the willingness to choose humanity over vengeance, those were the measures that defined them now. Vin's penthouse rose above the city, 40 floors of steel, glass, and marble, a fortress in the clouds. The snow continued its steady fall outside, blanketing streets and rooftops in quiet white. Celeste followed him inside, still trembling from the earlier attack. Her eyes scanned the sharp lines of the interior, the cool elegance of the space, the way sunlight, or city lights, bounced off surfaces that seemed untouchable. Security had been tripled. Every entrance and exit monitored. The sense of safety was overwhelming and foreign. Vin removed his coat, loosened his tie, and walked to the study. A glass of whiskey waited on the desk. He stared at the skyline, Chicago stretching beneath him, and felt the weight of what had just occurred pressing down. In his world, mercy was weakness. Every instinct screamed for retaliation, swift, total, merciless. The family responsible for the kidnapping would pay in full. Pain and fear were his language, and it had served him for decades. His lieutenant entered, eyes wary. They tried to take her. We need to respond. Weapons had been distributed, alliances called, men ready to move at a moment's notice. Vin imagined the orders, the strategy, the total annihilation he could command. It was what he knew, what he had always done. The old Vin would have relished it. Yet her voice lingered, fragile yet resolute. Please don't become that again. Celeste appeared in the doorway, coat still wrapped tight, eyes steady despite lingering fear. She did not ask him to lay down power. She did not ask him to be defenseless. She asked him to consider another path. The world has enough darkness. Don't add to it because of me. Vin's hands tightened around the glass. He spoke slowly, vulnerable in a way few had ever seen. They tried to take you. They need to pay. Her reply was simple but piercing. And what does that cost you? Your humanity? The progress you've made. The question struck him harder than any threat, any attack. He had not been changing for her because she demanded it, but because of her example. Every act of restraint, every moment of compassion, every choice to see life beyond fear and control had been reflected in her quiet, consistent presence. What kind of man do you want to be? She asked, voice unwavering. Vin felt the moment crystallize. The path was clear. Revenge would bring satisfaction, but at the cost of everything he had begun to rebuild within himself. Growth required restraint. Protection required wisdom. Punishment could be measured, strategic, but it could not cross the line into the destruction he had always relied upon. He chose the harder path. The rival family would face consequences, yes, but not murder. He made calls, setting up meetings that carried weight and authority but avoided bloodshed. Every move was precise, a demonstration that power could exist without falling back into violence. He would reshape his empire quietly, shifting focus from fear to strategy, proving that restraint could be its own form of control. Celeste watched him, the faintest relief visible in her expression. He returned to the study, glass in hand, a new calm settling over his features. The city below was the same, yet it felt different to him. Each light reflected not just buildings, but the possibility that a man could wield power without surrendering to the darkness he once accepted as necessary. For the first time, Vin understood that protection did not require domination. Strength could coexist with empathy. Control could coexist with restraint. And the girl who had walked into his life, who had shown him quiet courage, had become the measure by which he judged his choices. His penthouse, the city, the snow, all of it felt like a threshold. He had crossed from old instincts into something more deliberate. Violence could be avoided, calculated, and reserved for threats that truly demanded it. Celeste's safety was assured, not just by his men or by fear, but by the conscious choices he made, choices rooted in growth rather than reaction. In the quiet that followed, the weight of the moment pressed gently. He did not rejoice. He did not celebrate. He simply felt the clarity that had eluded him for years. Power without cruelty, protection without destruction. It was a path less taken, yet one he would now walk with purpose. Vin glanced at Celeste. Her steady presence reminded him that the hardest victories were often internal. The rival family, the attackers, the streets of Chicago, they could wait. For now, the priority was what he had learned, what he had chosen, and the example she had set. The penthouse settled into silence. Snow pressed against glass. And in that moment, Vin understood that the true measure of a man was not in the vengeance he could exact, but in the restraint he could maintain, guided by those who saw him more clearly than he had seen himself. Vin entered the private room at the Chicago Athletic Association Hotel, the winter light reflecting off the windows overlooking Millennium Park. The space was quiet, reserved, and deliberately neutral. Across the table, the rival boss sat with his men flanking him, the tension almost tangible. Every detail was observed, posture, gestures, the weight of silence between them. Vin's presence was controlled, deliberate, the ice in his blue eyes not flinching, not yielding. He addressed the room with steady authority. You targeted an innocent civilian. That is unacceptable, even in our world. His tone carried no threat of blood, yet the authority was undeniable. The rival boss leaned back, a smirk crossing his face. You've changed. You've gone soft. We wanted to test your resolve. Vin's gaze sharpened. Mercy isn't weakness. It's choice. I'm giving you one chance. The negotiation unfolded with measured words, careful concessions, and firm demands. Vin insisted on territorial adjustments but drew a clear, unbreakable line. Celeste and all civilians were off-limits. Any future breach would not be tolerated. The rival boss questioned the change. Really? You're doing this for a waitress? Vin's response was simple, precise. I'm doing this because the rules needed to change. She reminded me that some things, some people, are worth protecting without bringing ruin in my wake. The agreement took shape, tense but holding. Concessions were made, territories realigned, and a framework established that reduced civilian harm across all operations. Vin's approach signaled that power did not need to be enforced through fear alone. Discipline, intelligence, and restraint could be equally commanding. Returning to the penthouse, Vin found Celeste waiting, eyes wide with both worry and relief. He entered calmly, unbloodied, carrying only the weight of the decisions made. Relief washed over her face. He explained that the meeting had been successful, that boundaries had been established, and that the Empire's operations would shift. Legitimate businesses would now operate legitimately. Street-level conflicts would decrease. Violence would be reserved only for unavoidable threats, measured and calculated. Celeste listened, understanding the magnitude of what had occurred. She did not expect perfection. She knew he could not abandon his world entirely. Too many people depended on the structure, and any perceived weakness would invite attack. Yet, she recognized the effort, the direction, the deliberate choices that indicated change. Vin described the adjustments. Lieutenants would take on more operational responsibility, reducing his direct exposure to street-level threats. Investments in legitimate ventures would grow, not just as fronts, but as stable sources of revenue. His empire would evolve without sacrificing the protection of innocence. Celeste asked quietly, "And you? Can you trust yourself to keep to this path?" Vin's answer was measured, with a hint of the old steel beneath the surface. "It won't be easy. I can't guarantee perfection. But I will try, and I will measure my success by how well I protect what matters, without destroying more than necessary." She nodded, a small but meaningful acknowledgement. Their understanding deepened. The path ahead would be complicated, fraught with old habits and constant challenges, yet it was a path taken together, with shared awareness and trust. The snow continued outside the windows, quiet and undisturbed. Inside, the city hummed beneath them, unchanged yet subtly different in its rhythm for those who knew it. Vin had demonstrated that control and influence could exist alongside restraint. Power could be exercised without domination, protection without destruction. Celeste had shown him the possibility, and now he acted upon it. The day ended without celebration, without fanfare. Change was not instantaneous, and the world around them remained complex and dangerous. Yet a new precedent had been set. A rival family had been restrained, a civilian spared, and a man once ruled by instinct and fear had chosen deliberation over bloodshed. Celeste understood the significance, and in her quiet way, reminded him that the effort mattered as much as the result. The direction was clear: measured authority, conscious choices, and protection rooted in humanity rather than retribution. Vin stood by the window afterward, looking down at Millennium Park dusted in snow, a city both familiar and renewed. He had chosen differently. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of power balanced with the responsibility of restraint. And he knew that the hardest part of leadership was not to act with force, but to act with judgment, informed by the example of someone who saw his potential for more than fear and control. Winter eased into spring over Chicago. The streets remained busy, but a subtle shift had taken hold. Vin's empire was moving toward legitimacy, the harshness of street-level violence less pronounced. His reputation had not softened entirely. He was still a figure of power, but his influence was now measured and deliberate, his presence strategic rather than purely fearsome. Celeste completed her semester with strong grades, balancing study, work, and the undercurrent of change in her life. Vin called her one evening, the skyline stretching before him from his penthouse balcony. He laid everything out clearly, the scope of his life, the dangers, the responsibilities, the truths he could not alter. "I'm offering you a choice," he said. "You can leave with my protection, no strings, no expectations. Or you can stay, knowing the world you're entering." Celeste paused, weighing the darkness she could never fully escape against the light she had witnessed. She thought of the moments he had chosen restraint over destruction, the glimpses of a man trying to be better. Her terms were precise. She would not be a kept woman. She would continue her education, maintain her job, and preserve her independence. She would be with him on equal footing, not as property. Vin accepted her conditions, learning that control was not love, that true connection came through respect and trust rather than possession. Their life together unfolded in quiet, meaningful ways. He watched her study while he handled business, and they shared dinners at small neighborhood restaurants she favored. Every meal, every shared conversation, reinforced their evolving bond. Months later, Vin attended her community college graduation. Pride shone in his eyes, tempered by the knowledge of the world she had chosen to navigate alongside him. Celeste moved on to a 4-year university, pursuing her bachelor's degree, while their relationship continued to grow, imperfect, yet deeply connected. Challenges arose, as old patterns occasionally crept into Vin's behavior. He sometimes acted with instinctual authority, and she had to remind him that she was not fragile, that her strength was her own. Yet those moments were balanced by times of profound connection. Quiet mornings on the balcony overlooking Oak Street Beach, evenings walking along the river, conversations about uncertain futures held together by mutual respect. They acknowledged each other's truths. Vin would never be a conventional good man, but he had evolved. Celeste would never fully understand the complexities of his world, but she recognized the effort, the choices, and the humanity he was reclaiming. The lessons were clear and unspoken. Transformation required intention and persistence. Love did not erase the past, but it could guide a different future. Power could coexist with gentleness. Protection was meaningful when it empowered, not controlled. Strength lay in choice, and vulnerability could coexist with authority. Vin's dark heart had not fully softened. Scars remained, reminders of the life he had led. Yet it had opened enough to allow love in, enough to witness the courage and kindness of the woman who had inspired it. And in that opening, both found a balance, a world where fear no longer dictated every decision, where connection outweighed dominance, and where compassion proved as powerful as force. As the story closes, a final reflection lingers. Even the hardest hearts can shift with the right example. Celeste's quiet strength reminded Vin, and those watching, that change is possible, that humanity can be reclaimed, and that love, when chosen deliberately and fiercely, is a declaration of bravery. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and share where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support helps bring more powerful stories that explore the complexity of human hearts. How did you feel about Vin's transformation? Do you believe people can truly change? Let us know, and we'll see you in the next story.